If you want a high pressure jungler that can dominate the early stages of the game with her insane damage output, creative ganks, and huge outplay potential, Rek'sai is a premier candidate for your solo queue games. Welcome to the ultimate guide to Rek'sai in Season 11. Here's a quick breakdown of how we'll be going over the video. I'll touch on general concepts of Rek'sai's purpose as a champion and what success looks like in games that we're doing well on her. We'll then discuss different components of her kit and how we can work better to optimize each one of these. This includes going over different jungle matchups, rune optimizations, ability maxing, your build, pathing, how to play out ganks, and how to play out each phase of the game. But first, if you haven't yet, please subscribe for more content like this. It's free and you can always unsub if you want later as well. On to the video. Kicking things off with the rune sets, for Rek'sai you have two main keystones that you could be relying on. The first one is a Conqueror focused page and is the one that you can take into most matchups. Rek'sai has a lot of auto attack cancels and fast casting abilities that allow her to really maximize the value of Conqueror in the early to mid game. Her abilities also have extremely high scalings, which enable her to get a huge load of bursts that many champions would not be able to access that easily. The other keystone that Rek'sai can use as well is Hail of Blades, and it works well with her Fury mechanic, letting her stack it extremely quickly. This lets her become sort of a mini assassin as well in the early game. Both runes are good, but in your games I would recommend relying on Conqueror more because of its consistency. Also, Hail of Blades is only good if you can keep your opponent within the first rotation of autos that Hail grants you, and in a lot of matchups these days that usually isn't the case. For the Conqueror page, you can typically pair these runes with a standard Triumph, Legend Alacrity, and Coup de Grace combo with good kill potential with either a Domination or Sorcery secondary tree to round yourself out. With the Hail of Blades page, you can round out your primary tree with Cheap Shot, Eyeball Collection, and Relentless Hunter, and then rounding off with a Triumph and Legend Alacrity take to complete your high-paced rune page. For rune stats, you opt for the classic attack speed, adaptive force, and armor set that most junglers find themselves going for. A pretty well-rounded kit. Alright, so matchups. Rek'sai is a champ that tends to frustrate a lot of enemy junglers because she generally soft counters like all of them. Her burrow mechanic and her ability to dodge things with her ultimate makes it so hard to win skirmishes against her, especially in the early game. Champs like Lee Sin, Gragas, Hecarim, Xin Zhao, Kha'Zix all get knocked up and bursted by her insane burrow mechanic and straight up cancelling or nullifying the upfront damage that these champions have. Some other early game champions like Elise are able to go toe to toe against her in the early game, but those generally just become skill matchups at the worst. In terms of early game power, Rek'sai sits comfortably among the highest amount of raw stats and capability with few matchups to make her afraid. She gets outbeefed by junglers like Nunu and Zac, but all will fall against her early game prowess. Her Tremor Sense is also an extremely strong counter to junglers like Evelynn, Kha'Zix, and Shaco, who all get revealed by their invisibility and stealth tools. Rek'sai has a lot in her kit to counter enemy jungle tools, and both really useful and really annoying at the same time. Rek'sai's build follows the lines of most AD bruisers and sometimes assassin champions in the game. It usually follows the path of building a lot of damage early on to stat check opponents and then tanking up in the mid to late game to improve your survivability and create space in teamfights. Although Rek'sai has more single target focus than some other champions that fall into this category, she still generally follows the same path most of the time. This leads to her two main mythic choices right now being Stridebreaker and Prowler's Claw. Both options are really good, and the choice between which one is better generally depends on your role within the team and what the enemy's team comp has. If the enemy comp is fairly full of squishy targets that you can cut through easily, the lethality that Prowler's Claw provides will make you an unstoppable force and allows you to one-shot targets for the entirety of the game essentially. If the enemy instead has beefier targets and more frontline, that's when the more well-rounded stats of Stridebreaker may come in more handy. What both of these items have in common is that they both carry gap closing capabilities, which are really important for making Rek'sai not fall off in the later stages of the game. Another alternative that's been coming up more as well is actually Goredrinker, which is really useful for having more sustained fights and whatnot, but trades us off for slightly less capability when it comes to being able to lock people down. The other two mythics that Rek'sai loves really do make her job a lot easier, and you need to ensure that you can keep up if you were to opt for something like the Goredrinker. The rest of your build tends to be dictated based on your needs for the game, as Rek'sai can complement a lot of items really well. Bread and butter items like Sterix and Black Cleaver are going to be really necessary if you don't want to get one shot as Rek'sai in the mid game while still adding to your damage capabilities. GA and Edge of Night are also really good items for allowing yourself to basically go into the enemy backline without worrying that much. If you need more MR, Maw of Malmortius is probably the best in-slot choice here, with Spirit Visage also being helpful if you really value being a frontliner for your team. For boot choices, Rek'sai also tends to enjoy going whatever resistance boots suit her best. If you've played other AD bruiser champions before, building on Rek'sai is going to feel like a fairly familiar experience, and you can feel free to experiment with whatever items you feel work well, but most of them probably will. Let's jump over to pathing. So Rek'sai's pathing puts her in the gank heavy category of junglers in the game, and if you've ever seen her ganks, you'd probably know why. Rek'sai is subject to some of the most insane and creative ganks in the game and has a relatively short period of strength in the early game, so we want to be focusing on our pathing around providing as many gank up opportunities for us in the early game as possible. Our standard first clear is going to be a classic buff grump buff into gank pathing, with some variations depending on what buff we started and what lanes are providing opportunities for us to gank. For example, another variation of the 3-camp gank is to actually do red, Krugs, and Raptors and then gank. The idea behind this is that it allows you to stay on the red side of the map longer so that you're closer to respond to a gank when it's available. Believe it or not, with the right amount of optimization, Rek'sai can actually do a 6-camp clear and make it in time for Crab. You essentially have to do the clear perfectly in order to make it on time, and I'll link a guide on how to do this clear in the description, but even this clear is really viable if you find that it's more important to get that powerful level 4 and just go for higher quality ganks. When pathing on champions like Rek'sai, don't feel super pressured to always have to go for a gank, even when you might think it's a little bit coin flip. It's really helpful to just keep up your tempo for your first or second clear and then go for a high quality gank when you see that angle. In terms of where you want to start, like with most junglers in general, you should path towards the side that you want to be playing for and generally be providing gank pressure. If you don't know where to gank, generally look for laners on your team with winning matchups and those that can provide strength for you in a 2v2 scenario. Once identified, you can then adjust your first pathing so that you end up on their side of the map either when they need help or when you think you can provide a good gank opportunity. If you simply play around this condition, gank heavy junglers like Rek'sai will get huge dividends off of simple ganks that the enemy does not respect. Jumping into Rek'sai combos. So Rek'sai has a few relatively basic but helpful combos that massively improve her early damage in skirmishes when optimized, and these generally revolve around auto attack cancels to improve her quality of life. Her unburrowed Q is an auto attack reset, so it's good practice to auto and then use Q to provide her that free auto reset, which then technically provides her additional DPS in skirmishes. In addition, weaving in your empowered E right after your auto attack on cooldown is also good practice for the same reason, and therefore we should be trying our best to weave in as many of these auto attacks and abilities as possible. So a good skirmish combo would be to start off with burrowed Q to get damage off, unburrow for damage and a knockup, auto, and then use Q to reset your auto, continuing them until you have enough fury to your empowered E and then finishing with your R. This is the main combo you'll be relying on in your games and fights, and getting this down pat will be extremely core to winning your skirmishes. The way it plays out, of course, will vary depending on the situation and which champions you're facing, but this is generally how it's done. Another mild thing to consider is that you can actually channel Rek'sai's active items while you're in burrowed form to help close the gap and secure a knockup to start your combo off. Both Prowler's Claw and Stridebreaker active are castable while burrowed and can be really core to starting off assassination combos. Now to ganking. So this is probably one of the most important factors for Rek'Sai's playstyle, and this is her gank patterns. Thanks to her burrowed E creating these really unique opportunities, Rek'Sai can take gank angles where other junglers simply aren't able to capitalize on it. Being able to dodge wards and river and just fly through major walls in the enemy jungle, Rek'Sai can easily just burrow through and walk up to enemy laners when they won't see her coming. Most of the time, starting off a gank with Rek'Sai is pretty simple once you've secured a good position. Start off burrowed, tunnel in to close the gap, and then hit the knockup on the enemy laner so that both you and your laner have time to beat that kid up before he tries to get away. Then use the basic combo that we learned in the last section, meaning auto resetting and finishing our true damage E to lock down the kill. The same killer mentality continues when it comes to Rek'Sai in teamfights because that's the main thing she can do. Your job is to use your tools to reach the enemy backline and delete their carries, and creating as much space as possible after the fact to try and survive and win out the fight. Success in team fighting with Rek'Sai usually comes off the back of being able to create a lead in the early game and then using that to carve out the enemy team from the inside. If you aren't able to establish this lead, teamfighting on Rek'sai in general will be rather difficult, and you might find that you don't have enough damage to do the things you want to be doing on the champion. Using your ultimate to try and buy yourself time, almost like Zhonya's, while finishing off your priority targets will be key in ensuring that you survive long enough. Once you're in though, you're probably committed to the fight for the long haul, so get ready to get run over once you run out of tools. If you manage to survive enough rotations, then you can also use your burrowed E to escape the fight and recover your health. Without a doubt though, Rek'sai provides you the tools and the canvas to allow any creative jungler to establish a dominating lead and carry themselves with her incredible outplay potential. Hope this guide helps all of you out with your jungle endeavors with this champion, and I will see you in the next one. Stay fresh.